I'm Stephen Chung, and you're listening to US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Welcome to US Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm George Smart. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Palm Springs, California. Every February, they have a huge architecture and design festival called Modernism Week, which actually lasts 11 days. Modernism Week is an incredible spectacle of architecture, martinis, lectures, art, shopping, architecture movies, more martinis, more parties, tours, and detailed exhibits. You get to see places like Frank Sinatra's house with a piano-shaped pool, which is not actually a piano, but everybody says it is. You get to walk around in the bathroom where he and Ava Gardner used to throw things at each other. It'll really blow you away. If you're into mid-century modern, this is the week to come to. And U.S. Modernist was there talking with nearly all the keynote speakers, authors, and special guests at Modernism Week.
I'm Tom Gowd. I was along with George this year for my first time at Modernism Week. And while we were at Frank Sinatra's house, I managed to sneak into that bathroom where Ava Gardner threw, a champagne bottle at him?
Something like that, I think.
And it chipped out and put a crack in the sink. And they've never had it repaired, so I took a picture just to prove I was there, a little selfie with the crack.
Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Realtor Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for bringing modernist design expertise to buyers and sellers. Reach Angela at angelaroll.com, that's R-O-E-H-L, or 919-995-0550.
Today, George welcomes architect Dion Neutra and producer Devon Chivvis to our poolside studio at the swanky Hotel Skylark. Dion Neutra stars in a new documentary by PJ Letofsky about his father, Richard Neutra, that premiered at Modernism Week. And Devon Chivvis shares the latest progress on her exciting documentary, The Harvard Five. Pop quiz, who were the Harvard Five? Well, I know because it's on this piece of paper here. Architects that settled in New Canaan, Connecticut back in the 40s. John Johansen, Marcel Breuer, Landis Gores, Phillip Johansen, and Eliot Noyes. They transformed design across America and influenced a generation of architects across the world.
I've had the pleasure of knowing Dion Neutra for 8 years. He reads our weekly North Carolina Modernist newsletter, and I know this because he frequently writes back with commentary and useful information. The son of architect Richard Neutra, one of the best-known architects of the 20th century, Dion continued the firm after his father's death in 1970. He's written over a dozen books and consults with Neutra owners on restoring their houses worldwide. Dion stars in a new documentary by PJ Letofsky, Neutra, Survival Through Design, filmed in Vienna, Berlin, Switzerland, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs. We did not get to talk poolside at the swanky and sophisticated Hotel Skylark because it was unusually cold for Palm Springs in February, so we had to resort to the Skylark breakfast room, famous for its frittatas.
Dion, I want to talk about the new movie in which you're the star, which I saw the other night, which was great.
Okay.
But first, I really want to talk about your projects, like you just as Dion, post-1970.
Okay.
So we saw in the movie
right.
about the Huntington Library?
Huntington Beach Library.
Yeah. What year was that?
That was started in actually 69, just a few months before my father passed away. We were interviewed as a team. And then in the process of negotiating the contract with the city, we had the news that he'd passed away in Germany. So there was a really interesting moment of decision for the city. Did they wish to continue with just me without my father? And so it was there was a little bit of a balancing act going on, and my mother was kind enough to come to a city council meeting and made a plea on behalf of the firm. She said, on behalf of my husband, I wish that you would go forward with this project because I know he'd be very proud of what my son will do for you. So that was a very gracious thing, and then we overcame the problems with the city. They had a standard contract which was pretty onerous, and I needed to get off that and get into a more of a standard AIA agreement, which they finally agreed to. But it started a project that went for 5 years, and it ran into all kinds of difficulties. Starting with the early 70s, we had a energy crisis. That is
we had the 70s energy crisis with long lines at the gas station.
Exactly right. And so everybody who bid on the project was losing money because they hadn't estimated enough money to pay for staying in line for so long. So at a certain point, the general contractor approached me and said, we're going to have to recover $100,000 at least here to make ourselves whole. Can you figure out a way? And I said, my job is to get the job done for the budget. I can't think of a way to do that. He says, well, we'll find a way. We'll find errors in your plans, and we'll figure out ways to hit you with extras so we get up to $100,000.
Wow.
So that was the lead-in for the project. The next thing that happened in the middle of the construction was that the precast people for whom we're going to make the columns were on strike. And so then there was an issue. Are we going to try to cast these on the site instead? And we got a price from the contractor. Of course, he socked it to us and gave us a really high price. So we couldn't do that. So then we had to wait for the precast people to get off strike. So it was one thing after the other. It was just nothing but problems all the way through. But we finally got a fairly decent rendering of the project the way I originally conceived it. One of the major things that happened, though, on the way was that they suddenly announced at a certain point, we were into the last part of the working drawings, hey, we forgot to allow for the books. We have to cut $150,000 out of your budget in order to afford to put books in this building.
Wait, they're designing a library and they forgot the book budget.
They forgot the book budget. It had to come out of my budget. They said you get to redesign it because we realize your project, you probably can't save that much money. But then I went to the engineer, and we had these enormous 27-foot overhangs with at the edges of the building to protect the glass. And at the outer edges of that, we had precast concrete fascias, which were to be, as a permanent facing. And I said to him, what if we reduced the weight of those substantially and went to a corrugated aluminum replica of what we had originally designed? He says, yeah. I said, that's a big deal. Let me check on that. So he checked and found that by reducing the steel in those cantilevers, we saved about $100,000 right on the spot with that. And then I managed to save a couple of other things, and we finally brought the project in on the budget. And it was just politically, they were amazed. They couldn't believe it because they thought that we'd never be able to do it.
Well, let me ask about the building itself, because it has some very unique features for a library.
Right, yeah. One of the things I managed to save in the process, which were not big cost items, was, the libraries people, they would like you to order 500 copies of a certain chair because it's cheaper. That's a seat. We needed a seat for 500. I said I would rather break this up into a group of 3 or 4 different kinds of settings. I think it would be more interesting for people. They would have some choices. They could enjoy some individuality. We even set it up. We had certain areas where people were sort of like groupings with high pile carpet, sort of like their living room at home, where people were encouraged to sit on the floor and read amongst the furniture. There was another part of the building which was like an outdoor patio with a tile floor and outdoor furniture, so you felt like you were sitting out in a patio. All of this was dressed with indoor landscaping, and as I mentioned in the movie, we have skylights to allow the light to come through, to change, from time to time. And I have this theory that that's going to make you stay alert when you're studying so that you don't fall asleep in boredom. I even explored the possibility of having the lighting levels cycle change. But at that time, the technology didn't allow for that. Today, I think we could do that. The idea being you change the lighting level very subtly, raising and lowering it so that you're aware of something changing, but you don't quite know what it is. It's sort of a subliminal kind of thing, yeah.
And what about the water?
And the water was the other thought. They originally selected the site because there was a lake somewhere nearby down below. When I got on the site, I realized that lake was seasonal. If at certain times in the summer it would dry out. So I thought, well, that's fine. Let's reference that lake, but let's bring our own water into the project. So I designed an infinity pool around the outside of the building, which you could see together with the lake in the distance. And that was to be fully with water. Then I brought the water on the inside of the building as well, on the theory that if I could have some fountain effects going on and create some kind of ambient sound level inside, you could even bring your kids inside and they could talk in a normal tone rather than being told, shush, this is a library, people are studying, you have to be quiet, which is not at all natural for kids. And that turned out to be a big success. The water really works out well, and people do speak in a normal tone, and it's a complete success.
And the library is now 45 years old or so?
So, yes, it is.
And they've kept this water feature in there?
Well, unfortunately, recently they ran into trouble with the water, and they say they don't have trouble to repair it, so it's been sitting dry for 2 years. I'm very upset. Inside the water, they still keep it going. But the outside water features, they haven't had the budget to fix, which I think is a scandal. That should be their first priority, but apparently it's not.
And you said in the movie this was your favorite building.
It's my favorite building, yeah. I mean, I managed to create some interesting things, like I mentioned here, that we've never been able to do before or since. So I think I'm proud of those. Another one that I did was we collected all the books in a central core in the center on the theory that you could only reach so high to reach a book. So to put a 7-foot-high bookcase in a 16-foot-high ceiling is tremendously wasteful. So putting the books all in the center, we were able to reconfigure the interior and get all those interesting platforms that you saw that are in the movie. The other feature I did there was to air condition that area in such a way that the temperature was 10 degrees lower in there than it was outside. The theory is two. One, it's better for the books to be cool. Number two, people don't like to sit in a cold area. They'll get their book and go back outside where it's more comfortable and not block the aisles for where the books are being stored.
Sure.
So these are all techniques to manipulate the visitor without him being aware of it, but to serve the building better.
Now, your dad had this long history of great houses. Did you continue to design houses after 1970?
I did, yeah. The most important one I did was finished in 72, and I was sorry that he didn't have room in the movie to feature that particular project, but I consider that the most important residential feature we ever did because...
Which house was that?
It's called the Scheimer House. It's in Tarzana, Southern California, and it's about an 8,000 square foot house for a couple who became millionaires when they sold their animation studio to Westinghouse. They got millions of dollars. Suddenly they had a big budget. But they were unique people in that they were not spoiled. So they were wonderful to work with. And we had introduced water features into that house to an extent that you've never seen before. I even have a waterfall in the middle of the house, again, for sound. It separates the master suite from the rest of the house. The waterfall flows down, flows out through the glass and out to reflection pools out in front of the building. So it's surrounded on both sides by these pools, and they are still operating.
Is it still in the same family?
No, they both passed away, and within the last 18 months, a new owner took over. I managed to meet with him, and he seems to be sympathetic to try to sustain it and maintain it. So I hope that he does that.
Well, there's one house that was not featured in the film, and I'm surprised. Mm-hmm. And that was the famous Maslon house, mm-hmm. which seemed to be the point at where America woke up and tried to start doing something about destroyed modernist houses. So tell us the story about the Maslon house and how you found out about it.
Yeah, the Maslon house was built in '62 here in Palm Springs. And what's it called over there?
Rancho Mirage?
Rancho Mirage, yeah. Right on the golf course. These people were golfers, and they found a site that faced the golf course. So he had a golf cart parked in his garage, and he could go out there anytime and play. So that went on very, very happily for years. Finally, Mr. Maslon passed away, and then we visited Mrs. Maslon in the last year of her life. The house looked incredible. It was in perfect condition. They had a fabulous $35 million art collection displayed around the place, and it was just wonderful. Finally, Mrs. Maslon passed. They had 5 kids. They had to sell the house. They wanted to make sure they found somebody that would take care of it. So they added $500,000 to the price and finally found this guy who was an attorney who said, absolutely, I'm a fan. I'll take good care of this house, and that's what we'll do. So they sold to him, and within 2 weeks, he was out there just demolishing the house without any notice. And I don't know if he even got a permit. I don't think he even got a permit. The city was kind of lax at the time. So nobody actually photographed the actual physical demolition, but there was a photographer who went out the next week and shot some still photos, which we used. It was a devastation. It was a horrible thing, awful disappointment for everybody. And the city woke up and said, my God, there's a failure here. We didn't handle this very well. And they started a program where there are demolition permits now. They have to examine carefully what it is, and you can't go ahead right away, and it's much more difficult to demolish something in Rancho Mirage. The end of the story is that the site sat vacant for almost 2 years. Nobody did anything. After maybe 3 years, I heard that a house had been built on the site. So I was coming to Palm Springs, so I arranged with a woman who was a member of the golf club, could she take me inside? So she had a special key to a special members gate, and we rode out in her golf cart. We rode around, and we finally got down to the site, and I was able to take pictures of this new project, which was not all that much bigger than the original, certainly not as distinguished. And later, I even found out that it was not even built by the guy who had torn down the house, but instead by a subsequent owner.
So he had sold it.
He had apparently sold. I think he was so shamed and so ostracized by the community that he probably felt that he couldn't really sustain it. So he sold it, and the other person, instead of coming back to us and say, let's rebuild this, built his own version, which was kind of a nothing. The whole thing is memorialized in my book, the Neutras then and later. It's all in there in case anybody's interested.
I think they are. You can get that book on Amazon, right?
Amazon. It's
okay.
It's got Amazon, yeah.
Now, contrast the Maslon house with something more recent, which is the Largent house in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Has this kind of a similar story, but a different twist towards the end.
Yeah, very interesting. That house was done in 1935. It was the first house my father did in San Francisco. Many years later, a subsequent owner, added an Art Deco hook-on to the back of it, which was an indoor swimming pool, very expensive, but a complete Art Deco, very much in contrast to the front part of the house. But the front part of the house looked great. You could see it from the street. Everything was perfect. Somebody about 2 years ago bought the site with the intention of doing some remodeling. He took out a permit. Instead of remodeling it, his contractor tore the whole thing down.
Well, I've heard that they tore it down without even a permit.
Well, no, they had a remodeling permit.
But not a demolition.
Not a demolition permit.
Okay.
And so it was a big flap about that. And the owner said, well, I didn't order this. The contractor made this decision on his own. He decided that the house was in such terrible shape that he couldn't really save it. So he elected to tear it down. He was going to rebuild, with whatever. Well, that's not even true, because the man had plans to build a much bigger project on that site.
And contractors don't tear down houses on their own.
No, not really. So nobody believed that story. But there were a number of articles in the Chronicle about this, and I participated in them. Along the way, they asked me, would you be in favor of rebuilding it? Could you rebuild it if you wanted to? I said, absolutely. I mean, we have the plans. We could rebuild. We have photographs. So guess what? The Planning Commission votes 5-0 and orders this guy to rebuild this building.
First time that's happened,
That's
I
the
think,
first
ever.
time ever. Yeah, a wonderful variant on a theory. Most of the time you get a penalty, a financial penalty. Some people have held you off. You can't build for 5 years on the site because of that. But this is a much more imaginative solution, I thought. So I voted yes, let's do that. So last week I got an email. The guy's suing the city of San Francisco. They've taken away his constitutional rights. And so we're going to sit now for the next years with a fence around the area, and we're going to find out what happens.
So it'll be in litigation
It'll
for
be,
a while.
yeah, unfortunate story. But it's an interesting variant on the Maslon story.
Do you have projects you're working on now that are going to be coming out of the ground?
I have a few projects. One of them is in Australia, of all places.
Nice.
Yeah, I have a book out. It's called The Island Projects of the Neutra Practice. Again, Amazon. There were 10 projects we did on islands up to that point. So I thought it would be interesting. It's kind of unique to have so many island projects. So I published a book on it. When this person approached me from Australia, I said, wow, that's the biggest island of all. We could have the 11th island project.
Sure.
So we got started on that. It's been about a year ago, and unfortunately ran into some problems. The joint venture architect that I selected from several other people ended up romancing the client, and the client has ended up saying, we don't really need Neutra anymore, we're going to do it with my local architect. So that may or may not be anything that I can really point to. I have stayed in touch with them. I'm trying to give them some advice about how they should do the project. And maybe it'll still turn out to be a fairly decent house, but it's not exactly a thoroughbred Neutra. The other one that I might be doing is, we have a house in France. The only Neutra in France is near Lille, in the northwest corner of France. That house was completed in 1969.
Delacourt?
The Delacourt house, one of the last my father worked on. It had several owners, and finally, just recently, about a year ago, it came on the market. So I said, this is an opportunity. We should get the cities of Lille and Croix to cooperate and acquire this house as a semi-open community facility that people could visit.
Yeah.
Because the problem with these houses is they get bought by a private owner and you never get to see them again. So we're in process of that. There's a chance that it might happen. It's still a slow process. Anyway, about 2 months ago, I get an email from a guy who announces that he's from a small village in France. What part of France? It's halfway between Basel, Switzerland, and Paris, as the crow flies. It's about 200 miles from west of Basel. It's in the middle of a farm country. There's absolutely nothing charming about the area. It's just a farm area. So the guy wants to have these plans to study. I started asking him, what do you want to do with the plans? What's your interest? He said, I'm an engineer, I forget what kind, sort of an exotic engineer, but I'm way out in the middle of nowhere. My mother lives nearby, and I've decided I want to build a small house for her. She's now 76, and she's going to need help, and she's going to build a 2-bedroom house for her and to help her to be out in this area. And I thought it would be instructive if I had studied one of your projects. So he ordered the plans for the Oxley House, which is one that we did in La Jolla.
Okay.
So we get to talking a little bit, and I said, how are you going to do this house? Well, he said, gee, I wish I could afford you. It would be incredible, but I really don't have a budget, and I have to build it in phases, and I'm not sure how we're going to do this. So anyway, we have had a correspondence about this, and I got intrigued with it. I thought, number one, it'd be fabulous to do a second house in France.
Sure. Good excuse to go to France.
Yeah, well, he can't afford it, but maybe we could afford it. Anyway, the site has absolutely no charm, no interest, nothing. It's just flat farmlands all the way around. Way in the distance somewhere, there's a forest. You can see some forest. But that's it. So the challenge would be, how do you create sort of an interesting thing out of nothing? He has a big 2-acre site, so there's no problem with land. Plenty of land's kind of level. But anyway, I might do it. We're in the process of negotiating to see. I might do that house. So
That'll be fun.
That would be fun.
That would be fun.
Yeah, stay tuned.
You've written a lot of books, and your father wrote a number of books. One of them, very famous, called Survival Through Design.
Right.
I was fascinated to learn the other night that you've written something sort of like Survival Through Design for Idiots, or
For neophytes.
Neophytes,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. That was the result of a book club that we had running for about 3 years. We started it 3 years ago with the idea of reviewing my dad's book, piece by piece, on slow bits. So we read only a few pages every month, got together with the group and discussed it, because it's difficult reading.
Yeah.
And it's hard to follow. So
That would make a good audiobook,
it could be, yeah.
your version of it.
Yeah, it would. So I took notes, sort of boiled things down to their essence and kept notes of that. And then at the end of the process, I published the whole thing. It's called Survival Through Design for Neophytes. Amazon has it. Amazon also has used copies of the original book if people want to buy that. At the present time, we're doing a similar book club on my dad's autobiography. It's called Life and Shape. And so I've started to write a Life and Shape for Neophytes book. And I have the first third of the book already published. I'm in the process of developing the next third. And by the time we're through, if I live long enough to discuss the whole book, we'll publish a parallel volume of that one as well.
That would be great. That
Yeah.
would be really fun to have.
Yeah, we do this all through a Kindle Direct Publishing is what they call it now. It's at Amazon. Anyway, I'm working on another book called My 9 Decades in Silver Lake. I've lived in Silver Lake longer than anybody. That's where my father found the site in 1932 for the VDL Exploration House, if you will call it. Anyway, so I've lived there since 1932, and I've been keeping track of all the changes that have happened around the lake all this time. The lake is transitioning from a water storage facility to a recreational lake. And so that involves obviously rethinking how that whole thing is going to be used. We suffer from a problem that the neighborhood is so used to having this reservoir for their own personal enjoyment that they resist any ideas of having the public invited in from the outside. It's a major site in a major city, and you can't say, sorry, it's private.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so we have to get over that mentality and think more in terms of a broader sense of how it could be used by the
I
community.
mean, if all those billionaires out in Malibu have to share their beach,
Yeah.
then the residents of Silver Lake should be able to share that, right?
That's the message, and that's the challenge for the master planners. So my thought was to get this book published and share with the master planners some of these ideas that I've had over the years, many of which relate to this very subject. How can I make the reservoir more people-friendly and more inviting and more accepting of people?
Now, have you given any thought, Dion, to what you want to do on your 100th birthday? Because it's coming.
Celebrate, yeah. That'll be my celebrate with George Smart.
We should have a big party.
A big party.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's really a pleasure to talk with you again.
What a pleasure. Enjoyed it myself. Thank you.
Coming up next, George talks with Devon Chivvis about her upcoming documentary on the Harvard Five, and why growing up in a glass house was great if you had a tricycle.
When I was getting ready for this interview, I had talked to you before, but our intrepid researcher, Cindy, turned up a whole lot of material this time, and you are really impressive. Is there like a Jane Cousteau? You've been in submarines, you've been hunting for Nazis. Holy cow. The films you've been involved in sound like a blast, really fun.
Thank you. Yes, they have been amazing. So I actually am known more as an adventure, expedition, science, and history director, which is a little odd because I'm now doing a film about mid-century modern architecture. But yeah, my background somehow, after I got my master's in film, one thing led to another, and I found myself climbing mountains and going in submersibles to 3,000 feet deep and hunting for World War II sunken Japanese and German submarines on various different coasts.
Wow.
And yeah, it's been really, really exciting and fun.
Did you find any submarines?
Yeah, we did. In fact, we work with this amazing team out of the University of Hawaii, and they have 2 of, I think, only 12 twin submersibles, which means 2 at a time actually go down and kind of check on each other's safety. And through their incredible research on 2 of our diving days, we were able to locate 2 Japanese submarines that had never, ever been found before. And these were off the coast of Oahu in Hawaii.
Okay.
And it was the most magnificent moment. I mean, it's virtually impossible to explain what it's like to be cruising along in the pitch black at 3,000 feet deep. And all of a sudden you get a ping and you think, oh my God, this could be just a rock outcropping, or it could be a World War II relic. And you throw the lights up, and sometimes it is just a rock. But when it was the actual World War II sunken submarines, it's just a mind-blowing experience. To see them lit up, and they're massive, like 5 football fields long and 8 stories high, and they're in really pristine condition because they were sunken so deep. So the coldness of the ocean has preserved them. And you can see the lettering on the conning tower. You can see, it's amazing.
How do you protect these things then from plunderers and other people coming back and ruining what you just found?
Well, in the case of the Japanese submarines that we found off Oahu, they're so deep that it's virtually impossible to get to them without this extremely expensive, very high-tech submersible technology, which is, upwards of $50,000 a day to actually operate. So those guys are good. In the case of a number of the German submarines that we have worked on, which are off the coast of North Carolina, those are more easily available to people. Now, the other thing, though, that protects them off the coast there is the constantly changing landscape of the actual surface of the ocean floor in that area because of the Gulf Stream. So that can protect some of those subs. There have been a lot of issues, though, with commercial dive teams that will take people out there to see them, which is also potentially dangerous for the wreck and also for the people themselves. One of the most endangered wrecks, though, which I also worked on, was the excavation of Blackbeard, the pirates ship, which is also right there off the coast of North Carolina. And that is very close to shore, and they've actually had to set up an alarm system so that people don't go and try to take, or what would be stealing, the artifacts, because the artifacts actually belong to the people of North Carolina. But it's been a multi-year process to try and properly excavate them from the wreck and then properly deal with them so that they are processed and then put into the museum there.
How do you set up an alarm system for a wreck? I mean, I know my own home alarm system, how it works. I mean, it's like a button that you reset when you leave the wreck and it protects it. I mean, how does that work?
I think that's above my pay grade. I don't think I should venture to answer that question. I have no idea. I just know you don't want to get zapped. That's all I know.
Like, are there lasers?
I like to think there are lasers, yeah.
Yeah, lasers are always good.
Very Star Trek. Lasers always work. They always do the trick. Yeah, it's an amazing site. It's massive. I mean, Blackbeard's ship itself, I wish I actually knew the right number of feet, but it was a huge ship, and the bounty is incredible. And I'm not talking, Disneyized bounty of emeralds and gems and gold and stuff like that, but the historical bounty from cannons to shot to even latrines, porcelain for Blackbeard himself, other types of materials that made up the serveware for the rest of the pirates. It's just endless. It goes on and on and on and on and on.
I guess pirates had some sort of caste system on the boat. Where there were officers and there were other, general infantry people.
Yes, they're considered one of the very first democracies. And what I love about Blackbeard is that he was a great marketer. So the historical studies show that while he had this very, very fierce, reckless, violent image and would light his beard on fire as they approached the shores or approached other ships that they were going to pirate, there's apparently no record where he actually killed anybody. So it was all kind of a big fanfare to scare everybody off, and then he and his pirates, who again were in a very democratic society upon all of their ships, all of their vessels, would plunder, and then all of what they plundered would be fairly distributed among the various different pirates. And there was voting that was allowed to take place. And granted, Blackbeard was still, the king of his fleet. But yeah.
And how did this work? Do I go and say, like, I wanted to do the Canaan. Captain, Jesse shouldn't be able to do it again.
I mean, I guess. And Blackbeard would sit you two down, and he would say, now, boys, what are we really fighting about over here?
Wouldn't it be great if he was running a day, he'd have his own brand of rum?
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. If only he could have trademarked his name.
Yeah.
He would have made a fortune. I mean, as it were, he was exiled because, again, as the historical record goes, he intentionally scuttled his flagship because his team of pirates had gotten too large and he wasn't able to actually take care of everybody. So he had to lose some of them. So he scuttled his flagship, went ashore on just off the coast of North Carolina, and kind of lived undercover for a while, married a nice farm girl, and then somebody figured out he was Blackbeard, and then another pirate put a hit on him. And eventually he did lose his head.
Okay.
So he did go down in flames, but
he got knocked out by another syndicate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That is, at least as my memory serves. You might want to fact check that one.
Okay. I'll have our pirate research team get on that right away.
Thank you.
You're into architecture now with this film. So tell us about the Harvard Five and who the five were and why they're a big deal.
The Harvard Five are Phillip Johansen, who is potentially the most famous of them all these days because of his glass house that's in New Canaan, Connecticut. Then Marcel Breuer, who is also incredibly famous for everything. John Johansen, Landis Gores, and Eliot Noyes. And these five guys at one point or another all either taught, in the case of Breuer, or attended the Harvard School of Design. Once Breuer and Gropius had brought the whole concept of the Bauhaus from Germany to Harvard. And they had to leave Germany because Hitler was scared of them and kicked them out, essentially. Sure. So basically, these five men knew each other in various different ways, and Eliot Noyes was the first to discover New Canaan, Connecticut. And one thing led to another. I think John Johansen was next, and then subsequently all five of them came to visit and fell in love with the topography, fell in love with the sensibility of the closeness to New York City. And each one of them started building their own private homes there for themselves and for clients in the town of New Canaan. Which
is what, 40 minutes north of New York City, roughly?
Yes, yeah, just about. And it's the farthest stop on the train line from Grand Central. So back in the 40s, it was considered kind of the sticks because you could get to Greenwich, Connecticut, or Stamford much more quickly than you could to New Canaan. But what that allowed was for lower property pricing, lower taxes, and fewer restrictions. So the town actually played a role in allowing these five gentlemen to really think out of the box, which I say with a wink of the eye.
Yes, sure. Since they're a little boxy.
Since they're quite boxy. But they really allowed them to explore and to invent and to launch these incredibly creative, groundbreaking careers that the rest of them, that they all had throughout the 20th century.
It really is an interesting area when you look back in the history, because it just sort of became this avant-garde center. And eventually Phillip Johansen, of course, who was among the most famous of all of them, ultimately held court there with everybody, right? I mean, celebrities came and famous architects and philanthropists and...
Yeah, everybody. And even the right people in town who got it. There was a real sentiment of being sort of rebellious, which my grandparents were very much in favor of. They didn't like the traditionalism of the town, which was very typically colonial New England. You could imagine that the town of New Canaan, being in New England, though being a commuter town to New York City, was a very colonial traditional town. And the modernists came in and started building, their quote-unquote white matchboxes on sticks. And there was a real challenge from a lot of the traditionalists in town, which I think the modernists ended up really embracing. And that's part of the fun of the story. There's so many stories that go along with that, like a sort of an argument in the form of poems written to the local newspaper about why the modernists were important for the town, and then a refute from the traditionalists about why the modernists were wrecking the town. And it was all in the form of poetry, so it was very creative to begin with. But the town, coming back to it, and Phillip Johnson, who really did...
I think thou dost too progressive, something like that. Very lyrical.
So, yes, exactly. Very, very lyrical, very intelligent and fun, yet also driving each side's point home is what these poems were. So that will be part of the film for sure, because I think it's a really fun and intellectual and artistic way of managing conflict. But there are great stories. I've interviewed a woman named Ruth Smithers, who I think was really more of a city girl, but moved out to the country to have babies, and she just was going crazy, but knew about Phillip Johnson. So she opened the phone book, and she tells me this story in her interview. She opened up the phone book, and there was Phillip Johnson's name, so she called the number, and he picked up, and she said, "Hi, I'm Ruthie Smithers. I really like your work. I'd really love to come see your house." And he said, "Come on over." And so that's how things went in town. You know, whether you were a famous fashion designer or another famous architect, you would be invited to Phillip Johnson's just as much as pregnant Ruthie Smithers would be invited over. And Fred Noyes, son of Eliot Noyes, who is one of the Harvard Five, has great stories about swimming around in the pool and trying to figure out where you're supposed to go to the bathroom in the glass house, because, of course,
Oh, yeah.
it's hard to figure out if you don't know where it is.
You have to find the special door.
You have to find the special door, yeah. And you have to have a real reason to go in there. Otherwise, it was pretty much off limits. Yeah, but there are great stories, and I think that time period was really filled with optimism. That's what I've uncovered from interviewing those who really knew the five architects, one of whom is my mother, who grew up in one of Eliot Noyes' very first commissioned houses. In fact, I think it was his first commissioned house. So she remembers playing with all the Noyes kids. They were very, very close, and my grandfather was best friends with Marcel Breuer, and they'd play backgammon and drink martinis together. And I think it was just a really exciting, optimistic time period.
I really don't understand why the AIA doesn't adopt the martini as their official drink, because it's so prevalent throughout the profession for so long.
It really is. I mean, I'm told those were the times.
Bob Ivy, are you listening? You need to put that before the congregation and get their vote.
Yes, Bob, please do. We did enjoy a couple martinis last night, I'll admit. But it was really good.
Yeah, it was for Meals on Wheels.
Yes,
yeah,
it was.
Exactly.
It really was for Meals on Wheels. Those were expensive martinis if you break it down.
Yeah. So you're basically a New Canaan girl. I mean, you grew up there.
I did, yes. I grew up also in an Eliot Noyes house, which was his last house. He passed away during the construction. And I actually remember the day. We were on vacation in Cape Cod, and he was like an uncle to my mom, a very close uncle. So she got the phone call that he had died, and I mean, even as a little 3-year-old or whatever I was, I remember it very closely, very, very clearly. But yeah, I grew up in a glass house, and that was normal to me. You know, we could ride our bikes inside the house if we wanted to, because the floors were all slate. And
oh, really? That is so cool.
Yeah, and my parents were pretty laid back about things too, actually. So
you could do a couple of laps around the living room? Is that how it worked?
You could, before there was too much furniture.
It's like tricycles or bicycles?
I'm pretty sure we tested both out.
Okay.
Yeah,
I could see tricycles working.
Tricycles were no problem.
Yeah.
It certainly became a little bit more of a challenge when you went, off the training wheels. But we still tried it at least a few times.
Were you of the generation that had the metal tricycles, or were you big wheels generation?
That is a very telling question, George.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I should answer. I'm not sure how to answer that question. Let's just say we had both.
Okay.
Maybe we had one at my grandmother's. Maybe we had one at my house. Maybe we had a mixture. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I'll have to get our research staff to
dive
into that.
I know. Your researcher will probably, yikes, come up
Find
with
some photos.
That's terrifying, because you probably will.
I will. There's a new book out about Phillip Johnson by Mark Lamster, who was a guest in the show a little while back, that explores, it depends on how you view it, but it's either Phillip Johnson's phase of Nazism he went through, or the fact that people just kind of let him off the hook for all those activities, and he sort of changed heart and went on to become this icon of design.
Yeah, I talked to Hilary Lewis, who is one of his most noted biographers. She knew him really, really well. I did talk to her about that this fall, right before the book came out. And I think she would be able, of course, to speak more to that point. But the takeaway from my discussion with her was that it wasn't as prevalent of his thought process as perhaps it's made out to be. Mm-hmm. But I think from my own understanding of Phillip, he did go through a lot of different phases. And some of the other Harvard Five, John Johansen in particular, was very critical of him for going from traditional Bauhaus, very traditional mid-century modern thoughts and ideals to postmodern, for example, to such a degree.
Yeah, what's that building that looks like the cabinet up top?
Yeah, I can't remember the name offhand, but my grandmother always used to point it out to me and say, now that's when Phillip kind of went and did his own thing. And she'd explain to me, and she actually appreciated it because she was pretty wild. But yeah, it has that, it's a faux facade top on it that kind of doesn't really relate to any.
Makes the building look like it should be in a yard sale.
Yes, yeah. It does, exactly. And it's still there, which is kind of interesting, I suppose. But yeah, John Johansen was so angry at him for veering off and doing this postmodern stuff that they did not speak for 13 years. And I have an interview with John Johansen, who has also passed away since then. But it's a great interview where he tells the story about their reconciliation. And I guess John Johansen just decided 13 years was enough, called him up, walked down the driveway, and of course, they celebrated with martinis.
Of course.
And they went on from there.
Great peace is attained.
Yes.
Through the martini.
Yes.
Your film is still in development.
Yes.
Do you have kind of a target date when you want to release it to the world?
Well, that is also a lovely question. That, of course, depends on our fundraising and how quickly that goes.
So where can people find out more information about contributing to this project?
So I'm so glad you asked that question, George, about how to donate to the film if you're interested in doing so. We've made it very easy and very efficient. If you go to our website, which is www.theharvard5.com, and that's the word spelled out, not the number itself, there is a link on there to the International Documentary Association that accepts donations on behalf of the film. And you can click and donate digitally if you are so inclined, or if you feel like sending a check. The International Documentary Association will accept that too. And any and all amounts, even if it's just $1 to show your support, it all will add up, and it's all part of the process, and it's all part of the fun. So thank you in advance to anyone who's interested. We're going to get this film made.
Now, are you set up to accept Bitcoin yet for your film?
Not just yet.
If there are any folks in bunkers somewhere that want to contribute.
You know what? That's a really good point. We should look into that.
Just send an email to Devon and she'll work into it.
Just email me at devon@devonchivviscreative.com and I'll figure it out.
All right. Thanks, Devon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Want to hang out with U.S. Modernist at Modernism Week in February next year? Send an email to george@usmodernist.org with your name and phone number. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special agent for Modernist houses. 919-995-0550. Okay, take us out, Tom.
Visit USModernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 7,000 significant modernist houses, and access 2.5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Cindy Stratton, not her real name, researches guests from her secret underground lair. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another Modernism Week edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.